evening and welcome to Congressman Chuy Garcia's live congressional update virtual town hall. My name is Dr. Pati Garcia and I'm Congressman's Chief of Staff. I'll be moderating today's conversation. In a moment, I'll turn it over to Congressman Garcia, but first I'd like to explain the format of tonight's call. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat box on our website under this live feed or in the comments section of this Facebook live stream. Let us know what neighborhood or community you're joining us from in the 4th District. Thank you all that have pre-registered and pre-submitted their questions ahead of the live stream. And now I'm going to turn it over to our host, Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia.
Thank you for joining me this evening for our virtual town hall. There are over 700 people joining us thus far, which speaks to the urgency of the moment that we're in. As you know, Trump and his billionaire pals are in the middle of an unprecedented attack on our constitutional system and our communities. Why is this going on? From everything I've seen and heard and analyzed, everything is centered around creating the conditions to provide the biggest tax breaks ever to the richest, wealthiest people in our country at the expense of workers, families, farmers, and vulnerable communities. So let's get started. I'm going to provide a federal update on 3 areas of particular concern. First, I'll be covering immigration and Trump's mass deportation agenda, which has been the focus of many of his executive actions from day one. And next, I'll go over Trump's attempts to restrict funding from state and local governments and nonprofits, including key programs that provide Medicare, Medicaid, rental support, and small business assistance. And finally, related to the previous point, I'll cover Trump and Elon Musk's disastrous attacks on key agencies, including data breaches and on the federal workers who keep our government running. So we're going to get started with the update, and then we will have time for question and answer. Immigration. I'll start with the obvious. Republican trifecta, we are on the defense, fighting an uphill battle to protect our communities from Trump's anti-immigrant and mass deportation agenda. Trump wasted no time. Within the first 24 hours in office, he issued dozens of executive orders, most related to immigration, including declaring a national emergency at our southern border, functionally ending asylum, and attempting to end birthright citizenship, which violates the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. Birthright citizenship has been upheld by the Supreme Court before. This executive order has been repeatedly blocked by the courts. Last Thursday, a 4th federal judge blocked this order. Trump has put our district in the crosshairs of these actions. Before he was even inaugurated, he leaked plans that signaled that raids and home targeting would start in immigrant communities like our district, and they have. Trump has deputized other federal agencies like the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons to act on behalf of ICE. Federal agents have gone to people's homes, jobs, hospitals, targeting grandparents, children, and others. In Congress, I'm co-leading a bill called the Protecting Sensitive Locations Act to codify the longstanding policy of ensuring that ICE and Customs Border Patrol cannot conduct enforcement actions in schools, healthcare centers, places of worship, and other safe spaces. There ought to be bounds that respect these sacred places. In the district, I've partnered with nonprofits and local leaders to coordinate Know Your Rights workshops for community members in the city and in suburban communities as well. Remember, you have the right to remain silent, not to let anyone in your home or business without a warrant signed by a judge. And you have the right to seek a lawyer as well. And our education efforts are working. Trump's borders are. Tom Homan got on TV to complain because Chicagoland knows its rights. I know that you may feel threatened, but you are not alone. We will continue to protect immigrant and mixed status families. If you have any questions or would like to host a workshop, contact my staff for details. Also, my team continues to be active on immigration casework. Please contact us if you need help with your immigration applications. Trump and his administration are implementing Project 2025. And on immigration, it comes down to mass deportation, from recent immigrants to long-term immigrants with current active applications for green cards and DACA. There are concerted efforts to target, detain, and deport these people. And naturalized and US citizens, including Puerto Ricans, have also been targeted. Now we're seeing clear civil rights violations by detaining people in Guantanamo Bay. Because of all of this, we have to be extra vigilant, ensure our paperwork is in order, and we must organize. There are two bills that I want to bring to your attention, and know that I voted no on both of them. Both bills use an individual's tragedy to amplify negative stereotypes as a motivation to overgeneralize and criminalize all immigrants through law. Republicans introduced the Laken Riley Act, which ends due process for undocumented immigrants, including those with lawful status, like Dreamers and TPS holders, by subjecting them to mandatory immigration detention for being arrested or charged, even if they are innocent, even if they are never convicted of a crime. It can be used to destroy legal migration by empowering state attorneys general to sue to stop immigration. It will cost taxpayers $26 billion to implement in its first year alone, and $83 billion overall. Another bill, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act, which expands criteria for how a non-citizen can be deported if they admit to fleeing Border Patrol, even if they don't have charges, a trial, or conviction. So no due process. It's meant to trip people up because there's no requirement to know that you are fleeing. For example, if a vehicle is undercover, it impacts any non-citizen, undocumented, and over 12.8 million lawful permanent residents in the US. It applies anywhere within 100 miles of a US border, an area that includes 200 million Americans, 2/3 of all Americans, the 10 largest US cities, and all of the 4th congressional district. Believe me. Next week, we're expecting the No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act, which cynically weaponizes federal funding to punish sanctuary jurisdictions like Illinois, Cook County, and Chicago. The history of sanctuary cities is personal. In addition to opposing these bills, I'm co-leading congressional efforts to let my colleagues know about how radical these bills are and to keep them from voting for those bills. It's clear that Republicans and the Trump administration are using fear tactics to not only paralyze our communities, but also to extort our elected officials for doing the right thing like protecting immigrants and their neighbors and their communities. Freezes impoundment, nonprofit and state funding. Let's talk about the threats against federal funding. This administration attempted to freeze Medicaid, rental support, small business assistance, and so much more. This move was not only a betrayal to the American people, it was also illegal. Trump was threatening to withhold the funds if they did not align with his partisan agenda, even though funding rests with Congress per the Constitution, and Congress has already approved them. As it turns out, his approach was so unpopular with the American people that he had to save face a couple times by pretending to abandon course. And despite multiple court orders staying his freeze, Trump is still trying to freeze these funds. And let me just point out, on Medicaid, almost 40% of children in America receive their health care services through Medicaid. If this administration believes it can coerce us into abandoning our values and divide working people, it is mistaken. I expect this to be fought in court, and we will challenge in Congress and in the court of public opinion. I thank you all for reaching out to my office to share your stories on how the freeze and threats of shutdowns impact you and our services, projects, and programs. Know that I'll continue to fight against the Republican ripoff. Federal workers, data breaches, and agencies. Let me talk a little bit about this. I also heard from many of you that work in federal agencies, and we're also pushing hard against this overreach, from coordinating disaster response to testing soil samples for lead. Federal employees play an important role in keeping our communities safe. The federal workforce is under attack. Trump has anointed Elon Musk to do this dirty work. Under the guise of efficiency, Elon's using newly created Department of Government Efficiency to make blanket cuts, to fire thousands of workers and hurt our communities. But let's be clear, Elon hasn't been vetted, cleared, or approved by Congress. The American people did not vote for him. His actions are an affront to the safety and confidentiality measures we've put in place. He's there because he was probably Trump's largest contributor in his reelection campaign. One of Trump's numerous executive orders seeks to shrink the size of the federal workforce. In addition, a deferred resignation offer, a fork in the road, was put forth by the Trump administration to try and get federal workers to resign voluntarily. The administration has also followed through on its threat to fire probationary employees. Know this: these actions are completely disregarding of worker rights and individual contracts and violate union agreements. I'm also deeply concerned about Elon's team and their accessing of data of millions of federal workers and Americans through sensitive Treasury Department payment systems. An unelected billionaire can see your social security numbers and bank account information. He can see information about businesses that are competing against his companies for government contracts. And let's not forget that intellectual property that he can use for his own benefit. He is the richest man on the planet. And that's why 19 state attorneys general, including Illinois, have filed suit against the Trump administration, and they have gained an initial win blocking Musk and Doge from accessing the Treasury system temporarily. We must be vigilant. Equally concerning is the dismantling of federal agencies. Let's talk about education, for example. The 4th Congressional District has the highest population of children in the Chicagoland region, many of which depend on federal education programs and health services. The threat to dismantle the Department of Education really concerns me. From free and reduced lunch to special education, English language learner support, and financial aid for higher education. These are critical programs that ensure that education remains accessible, affordable, and a way to move up the economic ladder. We know that education is power, and in taking over or dismantling our public school systems, the Trump administration aims to reshift funding, control curriculum, line up their pockets with lucrative book and testing contracts, and overall privatize education. Rest assured, we will fight back to protect the rights of students, parents, and states to determine what's best for our communities. Even with executive orders, there are protections and rights established through Supreme Court cases and by law. Let's talk about workers and labor unions. Musk and Trump have also targeted the Department of Labor, but thanks to the fast action of the AFGE, SEIU, and other union partners, they filed a lawsuit for unlawful access and to secure a partial halt from federal court. The Department of Labor data includes not only personal worker data, but also information on investigations and pending labor complaints and disputes. There's a clear conflict of interest as the Department of Labor has several open investigations on Musk's companies. In addition, the Department of Labor has data on Musk's competitors, another conflict of interest. In the area of consumer protection, Musk has also targeted several key watchdog organizations, including the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The CFPB is an independent agency that protects consumers from predatory financial practices, hidden fees, and data privacy violations. It has won back over $20 billion for American consumers since its creation in 2008. And yet again, another conflict of interest for Musk as he intends to turn X into a virtual wallet service without the oversight of CFPB. Billionaires who get rich off predatory practices don't love this agency. And as of this weekend, Trump and his cronies shut it down. I strongly oppose these actions, and I've been loudly pushing back on congressional hearings, speaking up at protests and rallies, and joining oversight letters with congressional colleagues. As I close my federal update, I want to uplift the resiliency of our community and the resistance of workers, lawyers, community members, church leaders, and advocates who have demonstrated through rallies, letter writing campaigns, and calls to members and lawsuits. Know that we are making an impact, and it's evident in the court orders to halt these actions. Privacy laws are in place to protect individuals and ensure that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Preliminary court orders suggest the Trump administration violated the Privacy Act of 1974 and potentially some cybersecurity laws as well. No one is above the law, regardless of who is in the Oval Office. As daunting as it all feels, know that you are not alone. I'm energized to keep fighting alongside you, proudly representing you in Congress. And now I'll hand it back to our moderator to transition us to the next portion.
Thank you, Congressman Garcia, for sharing important information. Now we'll transition to the question and answer portion of our event. We received hundreds directly from constituents when registering for today's event. We will start with some of those pre-submitted questions. Now, if you didn't have a chance to submit ahead, you can still submit now through the chat box below our streaming on Facebook or on our website. Remember, let us know what community or neighborhood you're joining us from. So we'll go with our first question. We have our first question from residents in Chicago Lawn. Their question is, what plans do you have to ensure your constituents are protected from the abuse of the Trump administration?
I have shared some of the actions that I have participated in with members of Congress in Washington, D.C. We have pushed back on initiatives that we believe are unconstitutional, are in violation of the law, and are not authorized, like the funding freeze, because the Constitution clearly states that Congress has the power of the purse. At the local level, I have been working with leaders of organizations throughout the 4th District who have been educating people about knowing their rights, exerting their rights, and protecting their rights. And of course, we have done a host of events, including the Know Your Rights workshops, events in holding press conferences, rallies, and roundtables. We have met with a variety of groups throughout the district to ensure that people are protected, that they know their rights, and of course, that stand up for the rule of law and constitutional protections.
Thank you, Congressman. Next question is from Back of the Yards. How will the current situation with immigration affect residents of Chicago and state programs?
Can you repeat that? There was a part
Yes.
I didn't.
So we have a resident from Back of the Yards. Their question is, how will the current situation with immigration affect residents of Chicago and state programs?
It's very clear that this administration is putting great pressure on state governments to remove programs for immigrants and punish entities that serve undocumented people, other immigrants, and mixed status families. Chicago and Illinois have both taken very important measures over several decades now in ensuring that Illinois is a welcoming and inclusive state. Both of these jurisdictions, the state and the city, have recognized, the county of Cook as well, have recognized the contributions of immigrants and the vitality that they bring to our economy, the community building that they contribute to in creating vitality and strength and jobs, and a real sense of community throughout the metropolitan area. So as Trump and his operatives double down on enforcement, it's very, very important that institutions in communities, in neighborhoods, in schools, the faith community continue to teach people that they have rights and that they shouldn't be hopeless, just the way that the Back of the Yards community responded when one of the first scares of the mass deportation raids or visits occurred. Similarly, other communities have emulated and are seeking to keep people safe and protected wherever they live.
Thank you, Congressman. The next question coming to us from Brookfield in the western suburbs. We are concerned about the administration's proposed cuts to Medicaid programs, as well as the potential condition on federal funds, depending on a state sanctuary status. Cuts to Medicaid, combined with any limits or conditions to federal funds, would be devastating for the underserved communities in Illinois and healthcare providers. What are your thoughts on some of the impact that this could have for Medicaid programs or other health and federal programs?
I strongly agree with your statement, and of course, we'll seek to address your question. When Trump tried to freeze funding for the states, and especially the Medicaid programs, people across the country voiced their opposition and flooded calls to all offices in the US Congress, including mine. That was the first time that we saw Trump backtrack on his threat because he recognized that people, regardless of their partisan political affiliation, Democrat, Independent, or Republican, disagreed strongly with the proposal to cut that funding because so many people rely on it. It is essential for health services for many. I already underscored the importance for children, for families, for vulnerable communities, for people with disabilities. Many people rely on this program. On sanctuary cities funding, which will be a key part of our debate over the next 2 weeks in Washington. Again, if sanctuary states like Illinois, counties like Cook, cities like Chicago were to endure the severe cuts in funding, all of the citizens of Illinois, of Cook County, of Chicago would suffer. Why? Because it would affect not just funding for immigrants, but it would affect funding for roads, for schools, for law enforcement, for many types of services that all of us enjoy and have come to depend on for our quality of life. That is what is at risk right now in this fight that we are engaged in, and why I am committed to continuing to protect actions taken by Illinois over many decades by both Republican and Democratic leaders. The same, of course, at the county level and in the city of Chicago as well.
Thank you, Congressman. Very important update. In terms of switching gears a little bit, we're going to go into more specific question around funding and other laws. So we have a resident from Berwyn. Their question is, do you foresee cuts in federal funding for the workforce economic development industry? And thinking specifically of some of the provisions that they were able to pass under, you were able to support and vote on under the Inflation Reduction Act. What is the impact of some of the cuts that we're seeing to things that were promised and are currently being implemented under the IRA?
Great question. There continue to be threats and at least a momentary pause of over $20 million that have been allocated to Illinois, to communities across the state, including communities like Berwyn. The Inflation Reduction Act is a historic investment to reduce carbon emissions and included in provisions to construct clean energy sector jobs created by the law to provide living wages and, of course, to encourage the creation of workforce pipelines in many of these jobs that will be produced in a few years. These labor rules were finalized just last year for these programs, so I am cautiously optimistic that we can continue to protect them. Remember that this is the largest investment in greening up our economy, in protecting against flooding, which many communities in western suburban areas have experienced, and of course, in reducing emissions, in making communities more livable, walkable, providing opportunities for different modes of transportation like bicycling, better transit, etc. And of course, expanding our capacity to ecologically deal with the drainage of stormwater when we see the more frequent, larger storms that we seem to be experiencing.
Thank you, Congressman. It's really one of these things is one of the things that we want to add as we transition to the next portion is we've heard from constituents, we've heard from municipal leaders, we've heard from local elected officials that are really concerned about some of these potential cuts, and there's projects that are shovel ready and are waiting and anticipating some of these federal funds. So we look forward to have you continue fighting for the full implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. So now we're going to go from funding to follow up on some of the questions around data. You did provide a federal update on some of the data pieces. We have a resident from LaGrange Park. They'd like to know, their question is, what should be done about Dodge and evident conflicts of interest?
Doge or Dodge, DOGE is the acronym. Doge isn't about efficiency. In my estimation and seeing their actions over almost a month period. So far, Elon Musk has used it to undermine critical federal assistance to communities throughout the country, to weaken watchdog agencies that protect workers and consumers, as I have pointed out, to mine private business information that he can use to potentially get even richer from this information, thus the conflict of interest and access to very sensitive information. It's important that we not allow and that this man, the wealthiest man on earth, that he not be allowed to pull the rug from under the feet of thousands of working families whose breadwinners are federal workers, including, of course, veterans. So to answer the question, it's about using the tools that we have, and that means legal approaches like lawsuits, congressional subpoenas and hearings and press conferences, and public protests. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, these will be actions that we will be taking, and yes, we will be holding hearings across the country to inform and to take testimony from people and communities that are being affected by these unprecedented radical actions of this operative, who was again the largest backer of the Trump re-election campaign.
Thank you, Congressman, for that. One of the things I'd like to highlight is you've also pointed out before, right, that as we saw the attempts of the Trump administration and Dodge to freeze some of the federal funding and programs, you quickly saw that action overturned, right? This is not something that the public supports. We know everyone, regardless of party, relies on federal funding and programs, and so thank you for continuing to fight back. Switching gears a little bit, but keeping it to the same area of LaGrange Park, we have another resident who wants to talk a little bit about, or wants to hear from you on the Democratic response. What are we hearing in Congress? And so their question is there an opposition plan from the members of Congress and the Senate leadership to have a vocal and forceful strategy to slow down as much of these anti-constitutional actions as possible, such as these lawsuits or any other legal actions that can be in play?
The answer is yes, and more plans are gelling and will become more evident in the coming days. But I strongly support using all kinds of strategies to stop Trump's anti-constitutional actions, through lawsuits, to congressional obstruction, to protest and press conferences, as we have been doing this week and last week in Washington. I'm keeping in close touch with members of the Senate as well to do joint organizing strategies with allies to fight back against executive and Republican bills that support Trump's agenda on the House floor. And of course, I've been working with state and local partners here to keep funding going for as long as possible. The unprecedented investments that have been made in rebuilding our infrastructure in things like flood mitigation, improving transit, making rail overpasses and underpasses more frequent in different communities, given the presence of great infrastructure and diverse infrastructure. We need to fight to make sure that all the money that has been appropriated and allocated actually arrives and is used for the purposes that we have designated, which is to modernize our infrastructure and improve the quality of life of people throughout the 4th District.
Congressman. All right, now taking it to the northwest suburbs over in DuPage County, we have a resident from Elmhurst. Their question is, what is being done currently to stop Trump and Musk?
Great question. One that I keep hearing from people wherever I might be, at a press conference downtown, in Elmhurst, in Hinsdale, in LaGrange, in Berwyn, or Cicero. Well, let me tell you, we're fighting back through every possible avenue in the community, in the courts, and in Congress. And although I'm sure that you've heard of the hundreds of executive orders that have been signed, you should also know that countless lawyers, unions, business people, community organizations, and advocates have filed over 75 lawsuits, and we're winning on a majority of them so far. Others, of course, have not run their course yet, but we remain optimistic. The good news is that 26 of these cases have resulted in blocking or at least temporary pauses in the attempts by Musk and Trump. And to date, we've successfully blocked them from carrying out things like annulling birthright citizenship. You can't do that because the Constitution protects it. Federal funding freeze on Medicaid as the best example. The illegal and buyout resignation of federal workers, that remains a challenge. We've had some wins and others that we hope will come down the pike. And of course, limiting access to Department of Treasury data, preventing the firing of 2,000 USAID workers, and of course, the drastic cuts to the National Institute of Health, which remains a very important fight to be had. And of course, the removal of public health websites as well. My colleagues and I will continue to not back down. Remember, I was elected whip of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and we're using that vehicle to push back as much as possible, to educate and to provide the spine that is necessary to fight for the rights of our people, and of course, to protect democracy as well.
Thank you, Congressman. Now we're going back south to the southwest suburbs. We've got a question here from a resident in Brookfield, Illinois. Their question is, what is Congress doing to protect our trans community, particularly youth, from Trump's efforts to erase them from officially existing?
It's very clear that the Trump administration is seeking to persecute and vilify the trans community by using them as a scapegoat to cause hysteria, fear, and the distortion of realities. And that Republicans are forcing these bills to come up for a vote on the House floor. I'm a member of the Congressional Equality Caucus, have been for several Congresses, and I'm proud to work with my fellow members of the caucus to strengthen the opposition to those bills. It's important to note how harmful these anti-trans bills are. For example, Republicans put forth a bill that they claimed was about protecting girls in school sports. But the bill could not be implemented without genital exams of all the girls that play in school. Think about that for a minute. That's the type of intrusion and the conditions that we will create in girls' sports in schools. So we've got to be clear on what these policies are and what they mean for everybody. Terror for the targeted group, obviously, but also horrible consequences for the groups that Republicans are deceitfully pretending to protect.
Thank you, Congressman. Very much topic and that impacts our district and impacts people nationwide. Thank you for that. So switching gears a little bit, we've got some direct questions on community engagement. People want to know what can they do to help each other, to activate one another, but also to fight the misinformation. So we've got a resident from Hinsdale asking, how can the general public activate and fight misinformation?
This is an opportunity for people not to feel overwhelmed, not to feel helpless. Social media companies know the dangers of misinformation, for example, and have done nothing about it. In fact, Elon Musk is a big contributor to it. This is not about your uncle who sends videos. It's about online platforms that want our traffic and are manipulating information. So we have to make sure that we don't share everything that we see on social media. We can verify or correct information by posting some platform community notes and make sure that you get your information from credible sources, including some news organizations, and look around in your community to see if there are existing groups that you can collaborate with, get involved in pushing back against these efforts that just perpetuate misinformation and disinformation as well.
Thank you, Congressman. We're going to our last pre-submitted question, and this is from a resident from Riverside. Their question is, as your constituents, how can we work with you to push back against the attack on our democracy?
Well, the first thing is we've got to make our voices heard, and all of us must make our voices heard. As an organizer, I got to say it, you got to organize. You have to show up. You have to call your elected officials and organize events, a house meeting, a small rally, a march, a procession, to convey how you feel about what's being proposed in Washington, D.C. by the Republican trifecta in particular, because we've never seen anything like it before. I want to give a special shout out to Indivisible because they have a presence in all over suburban communities and in the city of Chicago, because today they showed up at my Archer Avenue office in Chicago. I'm sorry that I wasn't there. We were preparing for this town hall out here in the western suburban communities, but I hear you, I see you, and I'm with you. And finally, to use an old expression, democracy is not a spectator sport, so volunteer and get involved. The threats to our democracy have never been greater. The urgency has never been as close to home as it is today. We must respond in kind, and we've got to turn things around.
Thank you, Congressman. We have another question here from a youth member in they're asking specifically in Spanish. So I know you speak Spanish, and we're going to go ahead and take a question in Spanish. I'll go ahead and read it out loud in Spanish and then quickly translate it in English. So this is from a resident out in Brighton Park, back to Chicago. They want to know, ¿qué mensaje tiene para los jóvenes de comunidades inmigrantes que buscan involucrarse en la política local? ¿Cómo puede la comunidad colaborar directamente con su oficina para abordar las necesidades urgentes del vecindario? So this question comes from our live chat. So remember, if you have questions, drop them in the live chat. This is a resident from Brighton Park. Their question is, what message do you have for our youth, Congressman? Our youth who want to get involved locally, who want to get involved in politics, who want to get involved in civics. How can we work with you, collaborate with you or your office?
First in Spanish. Mil gracias por sintonizarnos y participar en esta reunión esta noche. La juventud va a jugar un papel muy crítico en recuperar la Constitución, las leyes del país y a la misma vez los cambios necesarios para que haya justicia, especialmente para la comunidad que se ha convertido en el blanco principal de este presidente, los inmigrantes, la comunidad latina, la comunidad hispanoparlante. Requerimos de ustedes, de sus ideas, de su energía, de sus habilidades para organizar en su vecindario, en las escuelas, en los colegios y universidades, y su participación es clave. Así como luchamos para proteger a la gente que tiene el estatus DACA o el estatus TPS, es importante que ustedes comuniquen al resto de la población, a la comunidad más amplia, quiénes son, qué es lo que les conmueve y cuáles son sus aspiraciones y su visión para fortalecer nuestra democracia. Es que le agradezco y le invito a estar en comunicación con nuestras oficinas, con otras organizaciones que están colaborando para proteger y defender a nuestra comunidad a la misma vez. Thank you so much to the young person from Brighton Park or whatever community young people may be tuning in and joining this town hall tonight. I'm very pleased that you are listening, that you are eager to get involved. My response in Spanish was that young people are going to be critical in the response to these threats against our democracy, the effort to try to create the conditions to give the richest people in this country, a select few, the largest tax breaks in history at the expense of workers, families, farmers, and vulnerable communities, to mention some of the affected sectors of the American public. Young people will play a critical role in helping to lead and organize the response to these efforts by sharing information that is truthful, by pointing out how these proposed cuts to programs that are essential, programs like Medicaid, nutrition programs, assistance and grants to farmers so that small family farmers can live and continue to thrive. Other investments that have been made by Congress already, signed into law, that this administration is seeking to halt or to freeze or to divert to help their billionaire contributors to their political campaigns. The role of young people is going to be essential in this response. If you want to connect, you can call our office, you can visit us, and of course, we can put you in touch with organizations that are doing this type of work to protect democracy and to improve the quality of life and services for everyone in America.
Thank you, Congressman. So we're going to go back to a topic about education. You mentioned earlier the 4th Congressional District has the largest number of children in the region, in the Chicagoland region. And so we have a question from a resident out in Stickney. They'd like to know what will be the impact for funding for special needs programs? Will it be reduced? Will they try to cut? What are you hearing?
The efforts to uh, send Musk's team, Doge, into the Department of Education includes, it is reported so far, a variety of radical measures, from eliminating the Department of Education to dismantling it to subbing out certain parts of it to other departments or agencies. Taking these measures would be very harmful to the country, to public education, and of course, additional efforts to divert public funding for the privatization of schools, to provide assistance or grants to private schools on and out department. This would be very bad. Title with low income students attend, nutritional assistance, a host of programs for people who need or who are English learners, on and on. It would be a terrible thing for funding.
Congressman, let's not forget, led in special education. It was actually thanks to Illinois federally special education became a law. So it is also a law that states must comply with to educate our special needs students. So we're switching gears here to close on our last question. Thank you all for all the questions. We have time for our last question. And this is from Brookfield. We have a question from Brookfield. They'd like to know, be letting Trump negotiate around Ukraine at all, let alone Ukraine and Europe. Let's look at the standing in the world. It's currently tanking. What are your thoughts?
I am flabbergasted by the actions of the Trump administration, by Trump's betrayal of Ukraine, Trump's accusing President Zelensky of being a dictator, Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance to Munich, Germany, to rally the descendants of the old Nazi party and to say that you should be more receptive and top of these extreme political currents in Europe. I cannot recall another administration, another president has ever taken these types of actions. To sit only 3 days after the vice president made these lauding the right-wing parties in Europe, the extremist parties in Europe, convening a summit in Saudi Arabia and not having a representative of the Ukrainian government, either President Zelensky or any designees from Ukraine, and of course, having any representatives from the European Union or from the North Treaty Organization as well. This is astounding to me, a betrayal of many traditions stemming from the rebuilding of Europe after World War II. But it is especially a slap in the to the people of Ukraine who have been resisting the oppressor government led by Vladimir Putin, and of course, all the people that have perished in war, which now has lasted for over 3 years. I will continue to speak out against this atrocious series of events, and I will continue to call upon Secretary of State Marco Rubio to change course. Look at all the rhetoric that he has espoused over several decades, all thrown to the side simply to please and appease his boss, Donald Trump, who has betrayed Ukraine and betrayed allies across the European Union as well.
Thank you, Congressman. Very well said. So again, thank you all for joining. We have no more time for questions, but I'd like to turn it over back to the Congressman for a few minutes for his closing remarks.
Thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate the time that you've taken to join me tonight. And sorry for the technical glitches that we've experienced, but we wanted to really have this meeting, and we will do others. I also want to take the opportunity to thank all the organizations, the advocates, community leaders, and neighbors who are speaking up and taking action, defending our communities. As an immigrant, I came to this country 60 years ago this month with my mother and siblings to join my father, who was already working here. We came here for a better future, one where every child has a chance to live free of fear, intimidation, or persecution, regardless of where they live, what language they speak, who they love. But today, I see families in our communities, families like yours, questioning whether the future is still within reach. I see families torn apart by outdated and inhumane immigration policies, justified under the guise of public safety. I see families struggling to afford medicine, food, childcare, while politicians call it efficiency. I see hardworking people wondering if they'll still have jobs tomorrow, as mass layoffs are framed as small government. Regardless of when or how we came to this country, one thing is certain: we will all fight like hell to ensure that we create and leave a better future for those who come after us. Despite the intentional chaos that aims to paralyze us and divide us, we must remain strong, laser focused, and united. The deranged forces attempting to demonize immigrants, working class families, LGBTQ individuals, and women, among others, are the very same forces that we have fought before. We fought against demagogues before. We will fight Trump's reckless agenda with everything we've got. We fought them in the 60s and 70s during the civil rights movement. We fought them in the 80s during the Reagan era. And we fought them in the 90s against the Republican-led attacks on our communities here in Illinois. And we fought them again in the 2000s, each time refusing to back down. And across my trajectory in the Chicago City Council, on the Cook County Board, in the Illinois Senate, and now in Congress, I have never wavered in fighting for values and for protecting our communities. And just as I've worked across party lines to push for progress, I will continue to make good trouble within my own party when necessary. We've taken an oath to defend our country against all threats, foreign and domestic, and we must uphold the U.S. Constitution, protect our civil rights, and stand united against this attack on our democracy. Know this: you are not alone. You and we are together. None of us are alone. And as your congressman, I will continue to amplify our voices and defend our rights. And not just when it's easy, but especially when it's tough. The future belongs to our young people, our dreamers, our workers, our students who will lead us forward. We owe it to them to keep fighting. We are powerful, We are resilient, and together we will win. If we couldn't get to your question today or need any assistance from federal agencies, please feel free to reach out to my office. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Congressman. That's all the time we have for tonight. If we didn't get to your question, remember to add them to the chat box, visit our website. You can also leave us comments or feedback, and make sure to sign up for our newsletter. Thank you for participating tonight. Have a great evening.